This is the Farm Voices podcast, sharing information about regenerative agriculture, climate resilience, and agricultural policy in the United States. I'm Kevin Castle.
I'm speaking with Emily Lewy Wang, who is the head of product and innovation at Atarraya Inc. Emily is located in New York, and we are discussing a farming enterprise with a distributed geographic footprint and an innovative mission in AgTech. Emily, thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to speak with you and learn more about your work.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
We recently met at Climate Underground at Canny Fork Farm, and I was surprised and delighted to learn about your connection to sustainable agriculture. Can you share a bit about the farm product of your company?
Yeah, so Atarraya, the kind of high level is we grow shrimp. And so we are growing shrimp in sort of a novel way that allows us to, one, have a no waste system. So we really don't have any waste products come out of our farm. Everything that we create has value, and we're either able to sell it externally or use it on the farm. Two, we are providing the freshest shrimp possible. So you mentioned we have a distributed kind of approach, and one of the reasons we did that is so that we can really be within only 300 miles of our customers. So that's kind of our radius for delivery. And it means that our customers are able to have like fresher shrimp that has no preservatives, no antibiotics. And that's something that most people have never even tried before. I know I hadn't before I ate our shrimp. So we're really proud of that. And it's pretty novel too in a market that is like 90% imported in the US. So we're doing something pretty different in terms of location. And then I think the last thing is just that we are doing something that can scale all over the world. So the way we've packaged our technology, it enables us to farm pretty much anywhere. We manufacture our own equipment, and we actually are able to set up farms super duper fast. So we just opened our second farm in New Jersey, in Plainfield, New Jersey, this week. It's been a really exciting week. And that farm took us about 60 days from basically like having the idea to like having the farm ready to go. So that's much faster, I'd say, than most farming operations. Certainly high tech farming tends to get set up. And so for us, those are kind of like the three things I think that describe what we're trying to do and kind of just give you a sense of like why it's a little bit different than maybe some of the other more traditional ways of approaching farming. And yeah, lastly, I just say like the origin story of our company is something I always really enjoy. So we actually started as a nonprofit. And I think you can see that in our sort of roots. But we originally were designed as an economic development project in Mexico, looking at how can we support fishermen who had lost their livelihoods in a particularly bad tropical storm off the coast of Oaxaca. And so a lot of what we've done is sort of built around, helping people learn how to do new things, applying technology to a very old industry, and trying to build a more sustainable future where people can kind of keep their livelihoods without damaging the environment.
Mm-hmm. That's really interesting, the connection to economic development at the founding of the company, the nonprofit origins. I didn't know that. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it's 10 years ago, so it's been a time in the making, but.
I really want to get back into more detail about your farm infrastructure and so forth, but I would like to just pause quickly and ask what is so special about shrimp, nutritionally speaking? Why shrimp?
Why shrimp? I mean, there's kind of two pieces maybe here. One is that Americans love shrimp. I love shrimp. I think a lot of people love shrimp. We eat a ridiculous amount of shrimp every year in this country. I think it's about 6 pounds per person. So if you think about what that actually might look like, it's a lot of shrimp. And there's a good reason for it. It's a very like low calorie food. It has very high nutrient density. You're actually getting like 20 grams of protein with one serving of shrimp. It also has omega-3s, which, as we know, are pretty good for us. And I think a lot of people eat salmon for the same reason. And it's a really good source of iodine, which is very helpful for thyroid function. So people who have difficulties with their thyroid should be eating more shrimp.
All right. So shrimp has a lot of benefits, a lot of health benefits. It has a lot of nutritional value. Could you explain a little bit about the shrimp that we are eating that is predominantly available on the market, where it originates, and the environmental problems associated with this shrimp that most of us are eating right now?
Yeah, for sure. I think kind of starting at the high level, there's two buckets of shrimp that we have, right? On the one hand, we have the more commodity shrimp, which is farmed. And then on the other hand, we have the wild caught shrimp, which is considered to be a bit more premium. That makes up about 30% of the US shrimp market, at least. And that shrimp is often caught, that can be caught domestically or also internationally. That a lot of shrimp we import might be from like Japan or something like that, on the premium side. But both of these approaches have kind of some fundamental environmental impacts that are pretty hard to avoid. So on the farming side, there's a lot of ties basically to mangrove forest destruction. Mangroves are a natural shrimp habitat, and so what tends to happen is they will clear cut a mangrove forest to essentially create the pools for shrimp farming. And then from there, it's sort of a water exchange system. So they're effectively exchanging water between the ocean and the pools, and the output of that effectively is polluting the ocean. And so it's about estimated to be like about the same amount of pollution as like a small coastal city, just the water exchange that's happening on these farms. And the mangrove destruction, I recently read actually, is now considered to be potentially the cause of up to 50% of all of the mangrove deforestation that's happened in the last 50 years. So shrimp is a really big impact on those environments, and in particular on the local ecosystems there. And it's also a big impact on the local communities there. So sometimes for the better, it's providing jobs for local people, but also it's been tied to a lot of forced labor instances. And there's some really good reporting from the Outlaw Ocean Project, if you're interested to like kind of learn a little bit more about this, where they're just finding, unfortunate examples, obviously, of human rights abuses that have been really, I think, fueling some of the low prices that production has been able to achieve. And, I think as a consumer, no one wants to be eating shrimp that has that kind of background. No one wants to be eating anything that has that kind of history. And it might be just certain pockets here and there, but it is a problem in the industry at large. So then that's kind of the farmed side of things, right? Not super pretty. And then on the wild caught side, sustainable fishing has been something that I think globally we've struggled with. So shrimp is not really any exception. For shrimp, the way that you need to get it, it's mostly a bottom crawling creature, right? So it'll be on the seabed most of the time. So a lot of traditional trawlers basically take these weighted nets, they drop them to the bottom of the ocean, and they scrape everything on the bottom to collect the shrimp. And this has a huge amount of bycatch associated with it. So I think the recent stat was like 5 to 1 pounds non-shrimp to shrimp, and then the non-shrimp basically just gets thrown overboard, usually dead, without the right kind of fishing, guidelines or regulatory environment. And a lot of this is happening out in the middle of the ocean where no one's really there to watch. So that's obviously devastating to the local ecosystem. And additionally, there's now some research showing that scraping of the seabed, not only are they doing that, I think it's like an area the size of Mexico every year, which is like mind-boggling to me to think about how much land we're trawling
Wow.
over. But they are also seeing that has a carbon emissions factor as well. So because the seabed is getting disturbed, it's kind of a lot like in soil, how if you till the soil, all of the carbon that's been stored under that soil is going to release back into the atmosphere. If you till the seabed, the same thing is going to happen. And so they think that it's now like I think there's like 370 million tons of carbon dioxide was just from this kind of trawling activity every year. And that's like pretty close to the same amount as aviation. So, no one's giving me a hard time about eating shrimp, but I've had some friends in the climate community definitely give me a hard time about taking flights. So maybe we can look at that a little bit more closely,
Right. And just to clarify, because you're using some terminology that I want to make sure we define, bycatch means when you said that
Yeah.
there.
So bycatch basically refers to the animals you catch that are not the intended um, fish, right? So if you're fishing for tuna and you caught like a bunch of, um, I don't know, dolphins in the process, those dolphins would be considered bycatch. In the case of shrimp, it's often many different kinds of fish. There's turtles, there's, other kinds of marine life, which basically get captured in these nets because they're very, very fine. Shrimp are very small relative to other marine life. And so in order to catch them, you need quite um, fine nets. Now, there are better practices that a lot of shrimping boats are able to put in place, especially some of the larger ones that are based in Florida have started doing this, that have like turtle escape hatches and other kinds of protective sort of measures against catching too many bycatch animals. But it's just not the sort of most widespread global practice at this point in time.
So we're getting all kinds of other animals along with the shrimp in this catch.
Yeah, more of them than they are of the actual shrimp, which is
Yeah.
kind of crazy, right?
Yeah, yeah. And one other thing that I wanted to bring up from your previous set of points, which is really important because I think we're all agreeing that soil health is immensely important to the functioning of our planet, to the nutrition of our food. You're saying that dragging the ocean floor is a lot like agriculture that uses a tilling practice.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a similar concept, right? It's like that disturbance of what is like sort of naturally happening on the seabed or in the soil has implications. It has ramifications for the carbon, for the health of that ecosystem. I mean, if you're thinking about what people, living on the bottom of the ocean floor as an animal, right? And you're just destroying your home every so often, that's really hard to rebuild.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a similar concept.
Yeah, thank you so much for bringing that up. That's really, really important. There are also some serious human health concerns with the shrimp that most of us are eating, regardless of the origin as wild caught or farmed. Could you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think I might have mentioned this when I was talking about the farming shrimp, but a big part of that water exchange problem is that you end up having a lot of unhealthy shrimp in the system because you can't basically pump the water fast enough to keep the water clean enough to keep the shrimp healthy. And so the result of that is a lot of shrimp farmers have tried to use antibiotics and often a lot of antibiotics in order to keep the shrimp healthier. So we all pretty much know at this point that excessive antibiotic use is bad for us. It's bad for our health. It causes, superorganisms and all these other scary things that we don't necessarily want to have to deal with. So that's definitely a big source of that. And then the other side of it is the preservatives. So these shrimp are mostly coming from thousands of miles away to their final destination. They're actually designed to sort of withstand freshness tests for up to 5 years before they're thawed and eaten. And there's nothing inherently wrong with freezing your food. I think if you're doing it the right way, it can be high quality. But if you're adding 100 times the federal regulations of metabisulfates, that's probably an issue. And just some kind of back of napkin math that we've been able to do at Atarraya tells us that, like, based on the size of the containers that people are using to do the dip, which is basically you take a concentrate, you pour it into the bucket, and then you dip the shrimp, and that's what adds the preservatives to them. If you think about how big those concentrates are or how much is in them and how big the boxes are, and you think about putting all of it into the box, that's going to get you to about 100 times the FDA allowed amount. So it's definitely a problem. There's also issues with it being effectively like causing allergic reactions. So this is a personal story for me, actually. I thought I was allergic to shrimp for 5 years. And it turns out I'm actually just allergic to TSP, which is tripolyphosphate, which is a very, very common preservative used on almost all commodity shrimp. And so I've actually been able to help a few other people in my life discovered their similar allergies. So we discovered we can actually eat shrimp and shellfish, which has been a big relief, just, eating other people's cooking and whatnot. But it is hard to avoid. It's hard to, not it's hard to find foods that don't have these kinds of preservatives, and especially it's hard to find shrimp that hasn't been treated with any of these preservatives or additives. And there's additional additives as well that get used for more cosmetic stuff. So they have, I think it's sodium bisulfate is used basically to prevent like the blackening or the browning of the shells, to make it look, appetizing on the shelf or when the customer receives it. And those things are kind of commonly used in food, but again, like at what concentrations and is it really necessary? So for the way we farm shrimp, we're not using any of those things. And we think that it not only tastes better, because you can taste these things. If you've ever bitten into a shrimp and you get this sort of like irony or like metallic taste at the end of your bite, that's not what shrimp tastes like. That's what preservatives taste like. And so I think it's a very different experience when you get to actually try something that is fresh and doesn't have these kinds of chemicals added to it. One, for your health, and I think many of us are feeling more concerned about what kinds of, additives are we actually putting into our bodies. But also just for the taste, like it's a better experience to eat something that is fresher and kind of, more of what we call the true flavor of shrimp. And so I think the health aspect here is really important to think about.
Mm-hmm. Yes, right. So this brings us to other methods of raising shrimp, specifically aquaculture, or the growing of aquatic animals for harvest. Can you describe the innovative aquaculture container that your company has developed?
Yeah, of course. I think one thing to clarify actually is that aquaculture does include traditional shrimp farming. It's really any kind of seafood farming. So there's many different kinds of aquaculture. But the one that we have is a biofloc-based circular modular farming system. It's a lot of words, but basically it's three different like layers of technology that we use that help us basically provide the best quality shrimp we possibly can. And so the first layer, and I think this is like the most important one because it was what we were developing in that economic development project. And what I think is the most different from how some other systems are working is called Biofloc. So Biofloc is effectively a sort of group of microorganisms and microbes that I kind of refer to as like our kombucha brew. It's like the mother. And basically they work to keep our tanks clean. And it's the same thing that happens in the ocean, right? So there's these microbes in the ocean that help to manage different nutrient cycles. And so for us, the main nutrient cycle that we focus on is the nitrogen cycle. And so we're working with these microbes to help manage the nitrogen cycle, which allows us to do a couple of good things. It allows us to grow more shrimp in our system because they can actually withstand these elevated levels of nitrogen because they're being processed by the microbes. And it allows us to just reduce the amount of water needed, right? So we don't actually have to use this like water exchange system that we were talking about with the traditional shrimp because we have the microbes doing a lot of that water biofiltering for us. So any water that we can come bring out, we can put into basically a very simple treatment plant on site and bring it right back into the system. And so that's where we have this sort of closed loop nature. We're not wasting any water, and we try to keep everything kind of in the whole system as it is. The other nice thing is these microbes become, and Biofloc is also a biofertilizer. So when they kind of have progressively eaten all of the nitrogen in the system, you end up with a nitrate that kind of floats to the top. We're able to skim it off. And that nitrate is a very effective fertilizer. It's very bioavailable. And so we've actually been doing a bunch of R&D testing in our kind of old farm in Oaxaca that is helping us understand like what are the kind of nutrient characteristics of it, what are the growth profiles for different crops. And so we're hoping to kind of be able to package that and start partnering with different regenerative farms to use that as a new input and a very effective, I would say, input for those types of regenerative farms that are looking for non-synthetic fertilizers. So that's really important. And I think the other nice thing about the biofertilizers or the Biofloc that is relevant to the question we were just talking about before with the health aspect is that we're talking about a community of microbes, right? So if you're talking about a community of microbes, adding antibiotics is going to kill them. So our system literally cannot have antibiotics in it because it will destroy the fundamental functioning of the system. And so that's a really important piece for us in terms of how we think about the health of the system. It's like if we can work with these microbes instead of against them, that's a real win for us. And this is very different from how other more popular, I would say, approaches to this kind of high tech shrimp farming has progressed. Most of those systems are called RAS systems. It's recirculating aquaculture system, I think is literally what it stands for. And those are effectively all based on water exchange. And the water exchange is limited to like not direct to ocean. It's more within like a municipal system, but it's very, very important for them to have like hyper sterilized clean water or else the shrimp will die. And this is kind of taking the opposite approach of saying we don't need sterilized and clean water. We need water that has these like healthy levels of microbial activity. And that helps us not only save on costs, but also just to save on the water as well.
And so
I think that's a critical part of the system.
Right. And those are modeled after what is happening in the natural ocean.
Absolutely. Yeah. All these microbes occur naturally. So we're not even like adding anything into the tank. We basically let them develop on their own. And so actually between different tanks, they might end up having slightly different communities. And that's okay. I think the main thing for us is like the monitoring process. And obviously, when things are getting too high in levels, we'll start skimming out that excess, like I mentioned, that is the biofertilizer. And those are the types of activities we do to help keep it in check. But it's more about kind of working with nature instead of working against it.
As opposed to running large volumes of water through filtering systems and really trying to remove everything. Exchange system.
I mean, you kind of kill everything that's good in the system, right? Like you have all this nutrients inherently built into the water that you've been using. And to just pull it out and like, throw it out effectively is, just a waste. And we don't sort of subscribe to that.
That's great.
Yeah. So most systems are really based on this complete like freshwater cycling, right? Where they want to have effectively sterile salt water rather than real ocean water. And as soon as they start, it's a very difficult balance. I think people underappreciate sometimes when we're talking about agriculture, especially when you're talking to more of like the consumer side, right? How delicate these systems are and how fragile some of these plants or animals or whatever may be and how sensitive they are to their environments, right? Like we think of a cow as like this very hardy thing, but shrimp are not. They're very, very delicate. They will molt as soon as there's a bad sort of pest in the environment. They will die overnight because the levels of nitrogen slightly exceeded, what you thought it was going to be in ammonia. And so they're very clear about their stress. They will start losing limbs when they are stressed out. They will start changing color when they have fibrosis, which is another sign of stress. And so we are always constantly monitoring for these types of behaviors to obviously correct anything that might be happening in the tank, because if you don't catch it soon enough, you lose that entire thing. And that's true for us, that's true for the RAS systems, and that's true for traditional farming as well. So it's really a question of how well are you able to manage those factors and look for those signs. And so we think that the Biofloc is just a better way of managing those factors.
Right. And you're managing those factors without antibiotics.
Without antibiotics, yeah. It's just good.
Right. So going back to the shrimp box and the container that you're using for this aquaculture process, which is really exciting. And I'm so glad that you're sharing all these details with us. This shrimp box is sold as a plug and play aquaculture system because Atarraya has developed another really significant layer of innovation, which is at the software level. What is unique about the shrimp box from a hardware, but really mainly a software perspective when compared to other aquaculture systems?
Yeah, so we have those two pieces. Yeah, you outlined them really well. We have basically on the hardware side, what we've done is we've been able to modularize all of the equipment. So we basically are just creating the same thing over and over and over again on our manufacturing side. And that's able to just increase our production kind of linearly with however many tanks we have in production. I think this is pretty different from just the land requirements and the sort of custom build sort of models that a lot of other systems might have. So obviously for an outdoor shrimp farm, a traditional shrimp farm, you're going to just see a lot of land use. But we're talking about much more massive production than what we have today. So even with that, to produce roughly the same amount of shrimp compared to a traditional farm, we're looking at, I think it's about a 95% reduction in land use to do our farm. And part of that is that we can use, let's say a warehouse building where we can vertically stack the rows of shrimp boxes. So there are some advantages that we have that obviously traditional farming can't, in terms of just like where can you put this thing? It's much more flexible on the hardware side. And I think because of that also, it's much more repeatable. So we can do it many, many times. So if you look at some of the more complicated RAS systems, they're really designed to be like aquariums. They have very clean, clear water, which we won't have. You can't see our shrimp when they're in the tanks because there's a sort of murky microbe layer that's obfuscating them a little bit. That's good. We like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as, pretty to look at potentially if you're looking for an aquarium style thing. But those things are all really custom. I mean, aquariums are very custom. So there's not a lot of like off the shelf parts that you can use to build those types of systems. And I think that makes it very hard for them to open a new farm very quickly like we have. So that's kind of on the hardware side. I'd say like that modularization, keeping it very simple to build and deploy allows us to just build more faster and have more shrimp production than some of these other options. And then with the software side, that's something I actually personally work on quite a lot. And so the way we think about this is right now we have our own 2 farms. We want to be thinking about how can we make this so easy that anybody can be a shrimp box farmer. And so we have this sort of central intelligence, if you will, that bakes in, what's happening in the tank, what has happened in the tank, what are our projections for how things are going to grow? So how do we map out like what's the inventory available for selling to the market? And then integrating that with like, okay, what are the processes we need to follow? What are the interventions that might need to be taken in order to like keep this tank healthy because we're seeing changes in the levels of the pH or the nitrogen or whatever it may be. And then we're able to kind of take all of that really complex information and basically simplify it into direct tasks that get assigned to the farmers who work on our farms. And so they'd have an app that they can walk around with that basically says, okay, go measure this, go take, this amount of feed and to put it into this tank, harvest this many pounds from tank number 5 and put it into this box. It's very specific. So it makes it a lot easier where like we have, very qualified, very smart people working on the farms and they're able to make a lot of decisions and, do stuff on their own, but also they have a lot of guidance and a lot of support to remember like, hey, there's like 50 things that need to happen today. How are we going to make sure that they all get done? So I think that kind of centralized intelligence is our first sort of step in making this something that anybody can do and really being able to train somebody to do it in, a month or 2 months. We have a bunch of things that are automatically done on the farm, especially measurement taking. We have some things that are done manually, but all of it kind of comes into this central place where we can basically learn and get better at making decisions based on the inputs that we see. So right now, we don't have any farms that we're working with that are not operated by us, but the goal is to have it so that we can have farmers that partner with us where we're more like providing support, providing infrastructure, and potentially even off-taking the shrimp that they're producing and making them really successful at doing the actual farming part.
And just to take one step back, because I love the way that you describe this, there are boxes that can be stacked. If we could picture shipping containers, right? These are like shipping container type boxes that are fully outfitted with the water tanks. I believe they're insulated, if I'm not mistaken. And they have some of the hardware and the pumps and things like that, and the aeration system kind of built into a closet at the end. Is that a fair description I'm sure you can elaborate.
I would say you got like 70% of it.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now we actually have two different models of our hardware. So the original model is the Blue Whale, which is the one that you're describing. It's I mean, it really looks like a shipping container. It's the same specifications as a standard shipping container. It has two tanks, one sort of on the lower level and one on a higher level. And it has, a whole host of systems for aeration and for water and feeding that go into that. So that's been like our model one. Our model two is we're calling it the shrimp box air. And the reason is instead of being made of steel, which is what our original Blue Whale was made of, it is a very lightweight plastic, basically like kiddie pool. Like it's much more similar to like a blow up pool that you would use for your kids than the steel box, right? And so the benefit of that one is it's actually 90% of the same systems, all that aeration systems and all of those other critical systems are the exact same for both models. The main difference is what is the tank made of and how is the tank used. So for the Blue Whale, one of the benefits is it can be stacked. We can actually fit shipping containers on top of each other. And that's something that, I don't think there's that many vertical shrimp farms in the world, if any. So that's a very novel idea. And then for the shrimp box air, the benefit is that these tanks are actually so light that we can have them on the third floor of a warehouse, which if you think about how much water we might be having inside of these tanks, it's a lot of water weight. And so not a lot of places would necessarily have the, infrastructure be like up to code in order to maintain and have the capacity for that much water being into the building. So that is a really, really cool innovation for us where we're now actually operating in our New Jersey location off of the third floor of a warehouse. And that's just something that is like really unheard of in this industry. And I think even within the plant-based vertical or indoor farming operations, there's very, very few people who are able to use this type of warehouse class, which is called Class C warehousing. It's lower ceilings, it's on the third floor. It's a lot harder for most people to take advantage of those spaces. So I think for us, we're really excited about the potential to use those sort of spaces, which aren't a good fit, frankly, for a lot of other types of operations.
Mm-hmm. That's very exciting.
Yeah, we're amped about it. It's also much cheaper because, plastic versus steel.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's always nice.
Yeah, that's really great. So thinking about your work from the business side, what is the overall mission of the organization?
I would say, and this is partly my perspective, and I think also the more broad company perspective, but we would like to see shrimp become a key sustainable protein for the future. I think, there's kind of a lot of debate in the protein sector in particular about what are we going to do in 2025? What does that look like? And there's not really a lot of good answers. I think you'll hear, from some people like, oh, everyone needs to go vegan. I'd love to see that happen. It might be very challenging, especially in our lifetimes, right? To see people change their diets that much. We're also at the same time seeing trends of just like globally wealthier societies, which tend to eat more meat. So actually demand for a lot of traditional protein is going up, not down, just at a global scale, right? And so how do you kind of like deal with those headwinds, if you will, to the sustainability movement, which needs to reduce carbon emissions and think about environmental protections. And a lot of production that happens today is just like doesn't meet those standards. So the way that we've been kind of thinking about shrimp is it's an incredibly efficient animal protein. It grows 10,000 times its size and weight in just 4 months. That's like insane amount of efficiency, especially if you're comparing this to like beef or chicken. It's converting protein to body mass at almost 1-to-1 ratio. So for every calorie you put into a shrimp, it's almost 1 calorie that you're going to get out of it later. I think that's again like unheard of. I think beef is closer to like 58-to-1 feed to output. So if we're thinking about like what are our options here? Like I see shrimp as an extremely efficient protein that we could really use to feed the world. And if we're able to not only think about, what are the efficiencies of using this thing, but also like, will people eat it? I think that's a huge thing that gets missed out on in that conversation. And yes, people will eat shrimp. It is America's #1 seafood. It is more popular than salmon, despite what you might think. And it's not that hard to imagine asking people to eat a little bit more shrimp instead of having a hamburger at the barbecue, right? It's harder maybe to get everyone to eat veggie burgers. So I think we're trying to kind of create a path where shrimp can actually live up to that potential. Because if we use the systems that we have right now and the supply chain that we have right now, as we've discussed, it's not really going to fix the problem, right? Shrimp on its own might be efficient, but if we're growing it in a way that's incredibly environmentally damaging, that's not going to be a sustainable protein for the future. And so I think the way that we approach our work and sort of the vision that we have for what should this become is to say, if we can get more people to farm shrimp the way we're farming shrimp, then this can be a real solution that can solve a really hard problem. And thinking about how are we even going to meet some of these demands for just protein and just shrimp by itself. Shrimp demand is growing up every year in the US. It's hard. We don't have the resources. We don't have more mangrove forests that we can cut down. We don't have more oceans that we can fish that haven't been fished. And so there's a real cap on like how much more can we get out of the system we have today. And so I think we're really going after that net new piece as well of like where consumers are looking to kind of add in more shrimp into their diets. Mm-hmm. And for the better.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because you kind of touched on this in what you just said, what is the geographic range of the company or area where you intend to impact the food system?
So I'm sure mentioned the United States like 16 times already, but yes, we are very focused on changing how we consume shrimp in the US. And a big reason for this is just that we eat the most shrimp, not per capita, but in total, we are the most shrimp eating country in the world. And so starting here, I think gives us an opportunity to really prove out that this can work, that we can address a really big market with what we are producing. And so our immediate focus at this current time is to really, really focus in on the Northeast, where we just opened our new farm, building that out, building up supply there, and getting shrimp to people like me who live in New York City. Can't wait to have it on the shelf at my grocery store. And once we kind of have, I think, covered a lot more of the United States and a lot of the key markets here, we would look to other countries that have, I think, similar consumption patterns to here. So I think like Japan has similar kind of high consumption pattern, as well as Europe. So those are like places that we would look to expand kind of after the United States, but we've got a lot of work to do here. So I'm not going to hold my breath for that.
Mm-hmm. And New York City is about to look forward to fresh, never frozen shrimp, right, from your company.
Yes, they are. Yeah, so we actually just opened our doors this Tuesday and are going to get our first shrimps out the door on tomorrow, I think. Yeah, to our first customer for the New Jersey farm. And we're just going to be adding a lot more capacity to production there over the next couple of months. And so I think we'll be sort of at the more full throttle on the market. You might see us at a restaurant. You might see us on your grocery shelf, probably sometime this spring.
Excellent. And just to touch on this quickly, from a business standpoint, in addition to the product, which is obviously very high quality, very special in and of itself, what is different or special about the shrimp box model?
I would say at a high level, we're pretty competitive in our space, right? For within the premium shrimp market, which would be like that super fresh, and often, compared to like the wild caught shrimp, we are very good on flavor. We're very good on texture. I mean, I actually just had a sit down with a chef we were working with yesterday, and just like tasting the raw shrimp dipped in like a little bit of soy sauce and yuzu, and like it's fantastic. Like I don't even have the words to express how much I love raw shrimp, and it's just like not something that you can really find or consume in most places because it's all frozen. You can't really eat that raw. or it has those preservatives and it's not very good. And so that's just sort of another piece, I would say, is the versatility of the product that we have, the ability for chefs or home cooks to be able to use it in these different ways and make like an aguachile, which is a very Mexican thing, which our founder loves to make. But not something that a lot of people in the United States have really been able to try before. It's super good. So I think the kind of competitiveness with the markets there are really important to what we're doing. Again, only delivering like 300 miles within the farm. And I think just the fact that it's highly scalable as well. So like we can, add a couple hundred more boxes to our farm in the next year. That's going to completely change the amount of shrimp that we can supply the market. So we're really able to like kind of elastically respond to demands. And I think that sets us up really well. But also we can fit into some of these unused spaces, like the warehouse that we were talking about, but also we're starting to look now at our next phase of expansion being in agricultural lands, looking at unused dairy houses, abandoned poultry farms or hog houses, and using that infrastructure that already exists but isn't being utilized or isn't being utilized how it was intended to be utilized anymore, as a new industry potentially to put into those spaces. And so I think that's something from a competitive standpoint will get us to 40 to 60% operating margins, which is not the standard for agriculture, not even close. And so I think being able to really like leapfrog other industries in terms of what's the value that this can provide to farmers is going to set us up really well for the future and to really just franchise this out to make it available to consumers all over the US.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to like underline that point because you have a very innovative product. You have now 2 different units that you're able to provide. One is the sort of shipping container scale.
The blue whale.
The blue whale, thank you. And then
Yeah.
the other one is the more lightweight pool that can go even on the 3rd story of a building. So you've got these units that you are able to work with farmers to install in their own farms anywhere in the country. And they
That's
can
the goal.
turn right, and they can turn infrastructure and space on the farm that is not involved in the production of protein into an entirely new line of product.
Yep. And I think with that, it's an interesting point in our kind of trajectory because I think we've been able to have some really great conversations with farmers. We've learned so much from talking to them also about like what are their needs and their fears about growing shrimp and doing something new, And so I think we've learned a lot from that. That was a big actually factor in pushing us to explore this shrimp box air model because of the cost savings and just hearing from farmers that the upfront kind of cost of buying one of the blue whales or a couple of the blue whales to set up a farm was going to be more than they could handle or would be concerned about trying to find the financing for. So we've been able to reduce that cost by 70%, which is obviously making this a lot more accessible to those farmers. And then I think, thinking about what structures exist, the big questions we have now are sort of like, what's the right model? What's the right scale? Is this something that somebody should be doing kind of part-time on like a little corner of their land while their main job is still their cropland or other kind of like livestock rotations? And this is sort of something that helps them get through the winter where it's this like consistent every week kind of income stream? Or is it something that really we should just scale it up very, very large, basically convince people who are 100% in on, let's say, chicken, but that's not working for them anymore because the economics in chicken have kind of fallen apart for a lot of farmers. Just go all in on shrimp. And so I think we're still like exploring with the folks that we're talking to about what's the right kind of model for us to engage with farmers, and is there sort of a tipping point where it does make sense or it doesn't make sense for them, and like how can we help them with that decision?
Mm-hmm. I wondered if there was anything else you wanted to say about that before we move on.
I think for me, just like I'm a New York City person. I haven't spent time on farms, and I think the fact that I'm even in this industry surprises me every day. But just feeling like there needs to be more options for farmers to stay in business, and hearing so much that it's just such a hard job and like something that's obviously so critical to all of our lives. Like we need to have a food supply, and it needs to be something that's exciting that people want to engage in. Um, so I think just that reuse of space, that reuse of farmland, hopefully to enable people to kind of keep going and doing what they're doing that they love, with a new way or like a new approach or a new revenue stream, is something that I feel surprisingly connected to, I guess I would say. It makes me really excited, even if I haven't spent much time on the farm.
So much of the work of sustainable or regenerative agriculture is in providing the training and sharing the technical expertise to make those changes that are necessary. And Atarraya has cleverly built that into the business model. So in addition to your farm that you just opened up in New Jersey, you also have a facility in Indianapolis. Could you talk a little bit about that training facility and the process and the role of the demonstration farm?
Yeah, and actually, I'll add that Indianapolis is also a commercial farm. So we are selling all the product that we produce there, into the local Midwest region, mostly Indianapolis and Chicago, and a little bit into Detroit. And that farm is very much, I think, our kind of like test bed for what we're doing. So we've talked a little bit about farmers, and I would say one other, very reasonable piece of feedback we've heard from farmers is if you guys don't have a 400 shrimp box farm, why should I have a 400 shrimp box farm? How is that going to work? And so, with New York, I think we're really getting to the stage where we can say, yes, this works. We're showing it work at the scale that we think is most viable for most other farmers. But within Indianapolis, we can use it more as a place for research and development. We can use it for also doing activities with the public. So we actually have an open door policy, which is really fun to have like schools and other community groups come in and like take a tour of the farm and show them like all the different things they're doing, have them see the like little swimming shrimp in the pools. Shrimp are very cute when they're swimming. It's not a thing I had known until I saw them. But I think it's nice to give people that kind of access to connect with their food. And also just see like what is it like to like eat something fresh that's literally just come out of the tank and onto your plate. So it's not an experience that people often have. In terms of like training for farmers and stuff, we've talked a little bit about the software, but I would say like we're using that facility in Indiana also as a place for us to make everything more intelligent, right? So we're learning, we're testing all the time. I mean, I have like 3 freezer tests I need to do to be like, okay, what happens if we freeze it on this date versus that date after it's been harvested? And how does that affect the flavor? How does that affect the texture? How should we process this smarter, so that we can keep the product as fresh and like great for customers as possible? So there's all these kinds of like questions that you just don't know until you try. And those are the kinds of things that we're doing on that farm.
That's great. So let's talk about your work as it relates to food access and sustainable agriculture in a little more detail. What are the key sustainability factors that help guide innovation at Atarraya? You've touched on this a little bit, but I just want to really get into that topic.
The two, I'd say, like pillars of our sustainability kind of focus is very much the no waste and then the local. I think those are like the two guiding principles that we have at the company. We definitely see opportunities always to improve, right? But I think a good example of no waste is things like the biofertilizer. Okay, that's something that we could have just scooped out and thrown away. Or we can look at what it is, see that there's value in it, and actually get it into the hands of somebody who can use it for something valuable. In this case, a farmer who needs to use fertilizers, right? Similarly, we are starting to build out a new kind of product of peel and devein shrimp, which is still shrimp. It's just been kind of pre-processed for you a little bit. But if we're doing that, we also end up with a lot of heads and shells. And that could be waste. We could throw that away, or we could make that into something that's valuable. So we're looking now into developing our own shrimp caldo, which is a really popular like Mexican shrimp soup. It's super good, which we would be able to sell to the market. We're also looking at working with chitosan producers. Chitosan is this kind of like plastic replacement that is a natural plastic based on the shells of crustaceans like shrimp. And so they might be able to use those shells in the production, and which can help kind of reduce plastic usage for various like products. I've actually talked to a vegan leather company that's making their leather out of this chitosan product. So that's pretty cool. And so if we kind of take things with that approach, I think you can see how like even where there's these like pockets of potential waste within the system, we're really trying to find ways to add value, get value, make sure that those things don't go to waste. Like the last thing we want basically is for something to just go straight to the landfill. And so I think that's a really key principle that we hold. And then the local side, we just don't do anything outside of our kind of local sphere. I think we're very good about kind of keeping it to where we are. We don't sell to LA. We don't sell to Texas, and we will eventually. We'd love to, but it's sort of a question for us now of how do we provide the best product possible? And we think that's to provide it locally.
Mm-hmm. That's great. And you've shared so many already, but are there any other areas of sustainability value in the production cycle that you're looking to develop as the company grows and moves forward?
The main area I see as a great area for us to kind of get smarter on, if you will, is on the energy consumption. I think obviously to, just run in our facility, we have to heat the tanks, we have to have the lights on. Those things use energy. And so we're definitely thinking about what are the ways that we can reduce that footprint, either by making the tanks more efficient. So we've recently been looking into like additional insulation for the new tank model, which would basically help keep all of the heat inside of the tanks. We also have been exploring like a PPA for solar electricity and maybe getting solar actually on the roof of their new warehouse. We'll see if we can swing that since we don't own the building, but would be very, very helpful, I think, to reducing that overall footprint. So that's like a good example of an area where I think, yeah, we certainly can do better.
And thinking about how we can do a better job of supporting you and all of this innovative work that you're doing, especially with regard to agricultural policy in the United States, the Farm Bill, the Inflation Reduction Act, has Atarraya used any federal programs or state funding or municipal funding sources to support your work, and what has been most helpful to you?
So we got funding from the economic development group in Indiana to come to Indianapolis. And I think that is the number one reason why we chose Indianapolis, because I don't know if anyone on our team even lived there beforehand. But it was definitely very helpful in getting that off the ground and getting just our first farm built. Without that, I don't think we would have started there or known really where to start. We have not received any kind of federal support at this point. I think it's something that we're actively pursuing. We have been in a bunch of like grant applications for the USDA. As you know, federal stuff moves pretty slowly. So still waiting to hear back on most of that. But I think, I would love to see more support in general for aquaculture. I think it's something that is not particularly well regulated because it sort of sits in between the USDA and NOAA in terms of like, is it, a fishery on the water versus on land? And so that's something that I think as we are exploring different avenues, especially for funding through government programs, it would be really great to have a better, clearer idea of, who kind of works on these things at that level. I think right now we're kind of taking shots in the dark, and I think other companies kind of coming in similar spaces like we are in the same boat.
Mm-hmm. And from an economic development perspective, like you're working in areas that overlap with adaptive reuse of buildings and, cities that may need to have new areas of growth economically would benefit from welcoming you in, like Indianapolis did. And also you overlap greatly with activities within urban agriculture, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting, and what you're doing is very beneficial for a wide range of environments.
Yeah, and we believe that like having something like this at the sort of seat of the table, especially when it comes to like controlled or indoor agriculture conversations, like we would love to be part of those conversations. Unfortunately, I think most people just don't even like it doesn't even occur to them that like things that aren't lettuce might be grown indoors. And so we're often maybe not purposefully excluded, but we're often not really invited to those types of conversations at this stage in our company development. And it's something I'd personally really like to see change. I think, there's a lot of people doing interesting things with unused spaces and wanting to do more interesting things in farming. And just even that acknowledgement that we won't necessarily fit into these like clean buckets would be a real benefit to us because we tend to be not fitting in any of the buckets perfectly.
Mm-hmm. And
It's
to be
a
able
bit
to
of a
move,
unique thing.
right, sorry, I was just going to say, to be able to move protein production into an urban environment is actually a very novel thing, especially to have such efficiency in your use of space versus the amount that you're able to produce. I think there's a lot of adjustment that has to happen to recognize the innovative thing that you've just brought to the table system.
I mean, if you think about like if you said just those words, right, of like urban protein, I would guess most regulators, most regular people, frankly, would just think of the like animal cell um, based agriculture, which is really like lab based work, right? And it's so different from what we're doing. So I think there's just sort of a lot of like preconceptions or biases that people bring to the table without knowing it that, yeah, we definitely would like to see them change a little bit and have things open up a little bit more in favor of things that don't fit in the boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
This touches on my next question about funding areas that we can expand or update that would be helpful to AgTech and sustainability focused innovations like yours.
Yes, this definitely is very related to me. I think yeah, the same kind of principle applies here, right? Whether it's for funding or just like for regulatory environments, we kind of are in this blind spot for a lot of folks of being whole animal protein, but not on agricultural land or maybe on agricultural land, but not kind of in the traditional way, like a very tech heavy kind of approach. And so we often kind of find that we don't tick all the boxes for like what somebody's looking for when it comes to like grant programs, for example. So if there were something like I think there's like a protein challenge that we heard about recently, but it excluded anything that was a whole animal protein. Um, and so that obviously doesn't include us. But do we think that we could be a really interesting part of that challenge? Like, yeah, we do. And so I think it's that kind of over prescriptiveness of sustainability funding or funds, whether it's private or public, that can sometimes, yeah, just leave novel ideas off the table. I mean, we've been able to find people who are excited about what we're doing and very, very interested to put their money where their mouths are on that. But it's not everybody, and it's yeah, could be a wider set, especially on the federal funding side.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. What would you most like to share with others about sustainable agriculture? What can be done for farmers for growing food and helping with water resources and climate impacts?
So I think this is probably a little off of my Atarraya focus script, but I think the more time I've spent in this space, the more I've actually, before I joined Atarraya, I was doing a lot of research into just the sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture space for a couple of investment firms. And there's a real kind of tension, right, between like where we are today, where we need to go, and how do we get there. And I think the like keyword that comes to mind for me is transition. I think we need to think a lot more about like what are the actual steps that we can take that help us with transition to a better world, to a better practice, for whatever number of reasons you think we need to transition, whether that's economic, I need to make more money on my farm, I need to make more money doing X, or these things need to become more affordable for the general public, whether that is environmental, local, like I care about pollution, I care about my water quality, I care about my air quality, or whether it's like a more global macro, like climate change, nebulous thing that is a little harder for people to relate to sometimes. I think we need to have steps in all of those different areas that kind of get us to a place where we have healthy, happy people that can like live in the world that we want to live in. And so when I think about why I joined Atarraya, a lot of why that was like that vision of having this be a sustainable protein in the future. To me, it's the perfect example of like what should a transition food look like, right? This is something we already eat. It's something people love. And if we can make it in a way that's better, so fix like this, big scary problem on the production side of it, we have the demand already. And so like that felt like a very achievable step that we can take to really like addressing a pretty significant problem. And even if we're only producing, 200,000 pounds a year right now, how do we get that to 200 million pounds a year? I don't know, but we're going to take those steps to transition to that. And I think as we go, we can still improve our technology to make it more sustainable, to make sure that closed loop is as tight as possible, to really live up to like our no waste potential. And I think if everyone kind of takes that same mindset of like, what are the steps that we can take now that kind of achieve these things and get us to that path, we'd be in a much better position than if we're kind of always trying to optimize for perfect from the get-go.
Thank you so much. It's been great
Thank
to
you,
talk
Kevin.
to you. It's nice to
Yeah,
see
thank
you
you so
again.
much for the opportunity. Yeah, it's something we're really passionate about. I'm really passionate about it personally. As you know, I talked your ear off at the event. So yeah, really glad to be able to come on and chat more about it.
I love hearing every single thing about shrimp and shrimp box and what Atarraya is doing. I want to thank you so much for your very important work. And it's been a pleasure. And I'm looking forward to getting some shrimp from New Jersey.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll send you a bag if you want.
Thank you so much, Emily. Have a good day.
Yeah. Thank you. So nice talking to you. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us. Links to the interviewed guests, farms, and topics discussed can be found in the episode notes. The Farm Voices podcast is produced by the Regenerative Agriculture Coalition, a working group of climate reality project leaders and chapter members. Please subscribe to this podcast, leave a review, and share the episode with others. It helps us raise the visibility of this important information, and we greatly appreciate your support. Join us in the next episode for more on the Farm Bill and farms and ranches practicing regenerative and conservation agriculture methods. Have a great week.